I want to tell you about the 6 days I spent in the hospital about 4 years ago, and the woman who visited me every night during those 6 days, and who, as far as the hospital staff were concerned, had never been there at all. First, the practical stuff, because it matters. I was in for emergency surgery, appendix, the classic middle of the night, everything is fine and then suddenly very much not scenario. I won't go into the medical details except to say it was caught in time and the surgery went well, and the 6 days I spent recovering were uncomfortable and slow and marked by the particular quality that hospital time has, which is that it moves differently than regular time, longer in some ways, shorter in others, strangely elastic. The way time gets when you're not able to do anything except be still and let your body do its work. I was in a private room. This matters because it meant the question of who was and wasn't in my room was a cleaner question than it would have been in a shared room with multiple patients and a busier traffic pattern. My room, my visitors, my nurses. A controlled environment as much as a hospital room ever is. My visitors during those 6 days were my brother, who came twice and was visibly uncomfortable with the hospital setting in the way that some people are, and my friend Janet, who came 3 times and brought food that was better than the hospital food and sat with me for 2 or 3 hours each visit and talked about things that had nothing to do with hospitals or illness, which was exactly what I needed. My parents called every day. A couple of other people texted. Nobody else came to see me in person. This is the complete inventory of my visitors as I knew them. But there was someone else. She appeared the first night, about 3 in the morning. I was awake. Hospital nights are difficult to sleep through. There's always someone checking something. There's always the noise of the ward outside the door. And I was also on painkillers that had the side effect of making my sleep shallow and my waking vivid, which is its own particular strange quality. I was lying in the dim room, the only light, the low night light near the floor, and the glow of the monitoring equipment, and I became aware that there was someone in the chair in the corner. The chair was a standard hospital visitor's chair, that utilitarian padded chair that hospitals provide because they've accepted that people will sit in them for long periods and have tried to make that slightly less punishing. My brother had sat in it. Janet had sat in it. Now someone else was sitting in it. She was an older woman, elderly, I'd say, though I had the sense that she was one of those people whose age was hard to pin down because they had been the same for a long time, had settled into their age rather than being visibly in the process of aging. Small and upright in the chair, the posture of someone who had kept their posture all their life. White hair, worn short. She was wearing what I can only describe as a house dress, the same kind of simple cotton garment that seems to come from an earlier era, and she had her hands folded in her lap with the stillness of someone who was very comfortable with being still. She was looking at me, not in an alarming way, not with any quality of menace or intensity, just looking at me with the calm attention of someone who is checking on you and finding you satisfactory, the way a nurse looks at a patient, but warmer than that. The way a grandmother looks at someone she's fond of, who has been through something hard. I said hi. She said, "Hello. How are you feeling?" I said, "Better than yesterday, I think." She nodded and said, "That's good. You should sleep." I said, "I will in a bit." "Who are you?" She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I'm just visiting. I live nearby." I said that was nice of her to come. She said it was no trouble. She said she liked to look in on the rooms when she could. She said she hoped I'd feel better soon, and that I was in good hands here, and that the surgery had gone well, and I'd have no lasting effects from it. I said, "Thank you." I said, "You seem very sure about that last part." She smiled. It was a good smile, unhurried and warm. She said, "Some things you just know." I fell asleep sometime during or shortly after that conversation. When I woke up at the regular morning nursing checks, the chair was empty, and the room was as it had been, and the morning was going. I thought about the woman, and I thought about the painkillers and the shallow sleep and the vivid waking that came with them, and I filed the encounter under probable dream or probable twilight state and went on with my day. She came back the second night. Same time, approximately. Same chair. Same composed posture, hands folded, looking at me. This time I was more awake when I noticed her, less groggy, more clearly in a waking state rather than a transitional one. And the encounter had a sharper quality to it that was harder to attribute to a painkiller twilight state. I said, "You came back." She said, "I told you I like to check in." I said, "What's your name?" She considered this for a moment in the way someone considers how much to say. Then she said, "You can call me Agnes." I said, "Agnes." She nodded. We talked for a while that second night. I was in the mood to talk that hospitals sometimes put you in. You have nothing to do and you're not comfortable enough to sleep easily, and someone appearing to sit with you in the dark feels like a genuine gift. She asked me about my life in that interested but undemanding way of someone who is sincerely curious without being intrusive. I told her things about my work, about where I lived, about my brother and what he was up to. She listened well, which is rarer than it sounds, the kind of listening that makes you feel heard rather than performed at. At some point I asked her again about herself. She said she had lived in this part of the city for a long time. She said she had known this hospital since it was smaller, since the neighborhood around it was different. She said she had always felt a pull toward the place, toward the people in it who were going through something hard and who needed someone to sit with them. I said that was a remarkable thing to give your time to. She said time was the one thing she had plenty of. I thought about that phrasing later. Time was the one thing she had plenty of. But at the moment I just nodded and let it go, and we talked a little longer, and then she said I should sleep, and I said she was probably right, and I drifted off. Third night, fourth night, fifth night. Same chair, same time, same Agnes. By the third night I had stopped questioning it and simply accepted it, the way you accept things in hospital time that you might push on harder in regular time. She was there, she was company, she was kind. The painkillers were tapering by the third and fourth nights, and my mind was clearer, and I was still fully aware of her, still capable of a real conversation, and the conversations were real. We talked about the city and its history, which she knew in detail. We talked about the nature of recovery, which she spoke about with the authority of someone who had watched a great many recoveries over a great many years. We talked about what it meant to be frightened, and then to come through the thing you were frightened of, which was something she seemed to understand from the inside. On the fifth night, I asked her directly whether she was a hospital volunteer. I'd thought about this as a practical explanation. Hospitals had volunteer visitor programs, people who gave their time to sit with patients who didn't have many visitors. It was entirely possible that Agnes was one of these people, that she had a badge and a schedule and a coordinator who assigned her to patients. She said no, she wasn't a volunteer. She said she just came on her own. I said, "Does the hospital know you're here?" She said, "Probably not, but they've never had cause to mind." I laughed at that, genuinely, which was the first time I'd laughed in a few days and felt good. She smiled her unhurried smile. I said, "I'm going home tomorrow. My discharge is in the morning." She said she knew. She said I'd been a pleasure to sit with. I said the same to her and meant it. She said, "You're going to be fine, not just from this, just in general. I wanted you to know that." I said, "How can you know that?" She said, "Some things you just know." The same thing she'd said on the first night, and then she said, "There are people who are going to need you in good health. You matter to more people than you realize. That's important to remember when things are hard." I thanked her. She nodded. I fell asleep. When I woke up the next morning to the discharge procedures, the room was empty. I went home and recovered and got on with my life. And for a while, Agnes was a thing I held in the category of hospital experiences. Soft-edged and vivid and hard to categorize. The kind of memory that feels significant without being clearly explicable. A few weeks after I got home, I was talking to my friend Janet and I mentioned Agnes. I'd been meaning to mention her since I got out, had kept forgetting in the business of recovery. I described her, the chair, the visits, the conversations. Janet listened and then asked the natural question, which was whether I'd found out who she was, whether I'd asked the nurses about her. I hadn't during the stay. I called the hospital afterward when Janet made me realize I should. I asked whether they had a volunteer visitor program. They did. I asked whether any volunteers would have been assigned to my room or would have had reason to be in my room during my stay. They checked. None had been assigned to my room. I gave my dates and the shift times, always around 3 a.m., and they confirmed that no volunteer activity was scheduled at that hour. I described Agnes, white hair, small cotton house dress, elderly. I asked whether any staff member matching that description might have been in my room. They checked. Nobody matching that description was on staff or volunteering at the hospital. They were pleasant about it, and I was pleasant back, and I thanked them, and I sat with what they'd told me. I've thought about Agnes many times since, not in a way that frightens me. I want to say that clearly, because this is a story that could be told in a frightening way, and I don't want to tell it that way, because it was not a frightening experience. What Agnes gave me in those 6 nights was exactly what she said she gave: company, presence, someone sitting with me in the dark hours when hospital nights are longest and most isolating, someone who talked to me and listened to me and told me I was going to be fine, with the certainty of someone who knew something about these things. I think about the phrasing she used, that she had always felt a pull toward the hospital, toward people who were going through something hard and needed someone to sit with them. I think about time being the one thing she had plenty of. I think about her knowing this hospital since it was smaller, since the neighborhood around it was different. The hospital I was in had been there since the 1940s. That's a long time to know a place. I think about the last thing she said, that there are people who are going to need me in good health, that I matter to more people than I realize. I have thought about that specific sentence more times than I can count in the 4 years since, in the hard times and the good times both. I have carried it around like something useful, something that does work when you hold it up against the moments when you need it. Whoever Agnes was, whatever she did me a kindness that I did not ask for and that I did not know I needed until she was sitting in that chair in the corner of my dark room at 3 in the morning telling me some things. You just know. I believe her. Still. About all of it. You're going to be fine. Not just from this, just in general. Some things you just know. Sleep well tonight. If you're going through something hard right now, or if the nights are long, I hope there's someone sitting with you in whatever way the sitting can happen. And I hope they tell you what Agnes told me, because it's true. Good night.